He was my neighbor.
He was my husband.
He was my stepdad.
He was my daughter's uncle.
He was my dad.
I don't think very many people realize that over 90% of children who have been the victim of sexual abuse were abused by somebody they knew or loved. And that's a compelling statistic. Do you remember ever having a conversation with your mom or any other family member about the idea or the concept of stranger danger and what that means?
My mother would always tell me to never accept either food or beverages from anybody and to never get in a car with a stranger.
My family always talked when you're at school and if anybody is trying to pick you up, you better say no.
She would always say don't talk to strangers, just avoid them,
I think the parents that do spend the time talking stranger danger, it's generally don't leave with somebody, stay with mommy.
Had anyone ever talked to you about the possibility that somebody that you know or somebody you would consider to be a friend or even a friend of a friend could possibly hurt you?
No. And I feel that's something a lot of people need to do now, going through it myself.
My mother always says that the only friend is God, and she didn't tell me that they would hurt me in an inappropriate sense. The only situation where one of my friends would hurt me is offering me drugs or peer pressuring me, but to her it wasn't anything inappropriate.
Was it foreign for you to even think about the fact that somebody who is supposed to be a protector and who's supposed to love you would do something like that?
No, I never thought that someone my family or someone I trust would hurt me. It never crossed my mind. I never would have expected it.
Stranger danger doesn't only apply to everybody around you. It can also happen in your home.
Were there any warning signs that you, looking back in retrospect, that you recognize now were red flags?
Yeah. He used to call her bebe. He always used to call her bebe. Oh, she's my bebe, she's my bebe. And he would always kiss her nose. He wouldn't let her go out with some friends. And I remember one time I yelled at him pretty bad. And I was like, well, you're not her boyfriend. And he would be like, well, I know I'm not her boyfriend. Well, yeah, but that's what you're acting like. You're acting like you're so possessive over her. So jealous. I never liked it. He never did it in front of me maliciously or anything like that, but I just never liked it, especially as she was getting older.
Had it ever crossed your mind ever that George or somebody that close would ever hurt your daughter?
I never would have married him. I never would have been with him.
It's not a fun topic, but yes, it is very uncomfortable, but we need to start talking to each other. We need to start talking with kids, having open conversations, age appropriate, about their bodies and boundaries and sex.
What guidance would you give to parents to try and help prevent their child from being abused?
I wish I had a foolproof answer for that, because then this wouldn't happen anymore. But I think the most important thing is to educate your kids about appropriate versus inappropriate touchings, and to just make your kids comfortable in an open communication with you as a parent, to know that they can tell you anything and they will not be in trouble.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how you got to know your abuser?
I was really good friends with Jenny, his wife, and we had been childhood friends since we were younger. And Alan came into the picture randomly, and I was just introduced to him when Jenny said, here's my husband, and we're having a baby. So at first I didn't think much of it, but Alan asked for my number, so I said, okay, I'll give you my number, why not? After I gave him my number, he asked for all of my social media. Jenny didn't express any discomfort with him asking me for that, so I shared my information with him. And then he'd always ask me to come outside and go talk to him and Jenny. We had the same interests in music, so I guess he used that to his advantage. He said that he hadn't met anybody that was younger that shared the same interests as him. He would tell me that I was mature for my age. He'd always compliment my features. He'd tell me that I was beautiful. He made me feel like I had a lot of worth, and that was important to me because I didn't have any confidence in myself, and I believed him. I believed everything he told me. It seemed like somebody finally cared about me.
And how old was he, if
he
you
was
remember?
33.
Okay, and how old were you at the time?
14.
I was around 6 years old, so it was kind of like a year later after him and my mom got married, and he had told me, like, hey, you know, this is something how I'm gonna show my love to you, like, this is how we're gonna bond, like, this is the love that a father shows his daughter. And so I thought, okay, you know, like, whatever, it's like, I'm 6 years old, I don't know anything about this. And so that's when the abuse, like, started to occur, but I felt that it was normal.
It's just a normal father-daughter relationship?
Yeah, he would, like, buy me gifts and stuff, or, like, hey, like, let's go to the movies, or let's go out to eat, and then, like, the abuse would happen afterwards. He made everybody trust him. Like, he really did. He really had that power to manipulate people into thinking that he was somebody else than he really was.
Sometimes I don't want to, like, believe it. My dad, one time we were playing and he got really close to me, but I didn't see it that way because I'm like, oh, maybe we're just playing around, we're like being really close, we're hugging each other and we're tickling each other. But one time, like, he got really close, and like it was just like an uncomfortable, it was really uncomfortable. Yeah.
And you could differentiate between something that's like a
that
normal hug.
Yeah, it was not normal, it was unusual, like something he had never, it was like too far. Yeah.
It was the beginning of my sophomore year, and he had offered to give me a ride home, and I had this, like, gut feeling that something bad was going to happen to me. At first, he was just driving us home normally, and he dropped my sister off at our apartment complex, but when I was about to step out of the car, he said, oh no, your sister's not going, she's gonna stay with me because I'm gonna take her out to eat. And I didn't think it was okay for me to be rude or to decline any offer of his.
Did you ever in your mind think that he would attempt to do anything to hurt you, or did you think he was just being kind and complimentary? And
I thought he was being kind and complimentary, but that was just me being naive. I saw the signs that the situation could escalate, but I chose to ignore them.
So now you're with him in the car, and he takes you, does he take you somewhere to eat?
Yeah, we just got my food, and I told him that I was going to go home and eat it there, but as I said that, he had driven right past our apartment complex, and I asked him where we were going. He said, oh, we're gonna go to a park, and you can eat there, and we can just stay in the car and talk for a while if you want. And I said, oh, well, I have to go home because my mom's gonna be wondering where I am, and she's really strict. And he said, no, you're not going home, your mom doesn't get home till late.
How did that make you feel when he was now telling you that he was aware of when your mom would come and go?
I was scared. He had been stalking me, or at least following me. He knew my schedule. He knew who would be home at that time. He knew that it was just my sister and that she didn't care.
At this time, when you're in the car, did you see a shift in kind of his personality from when?
He seemed dominant and, like, possessive. He didn't listen to me. I kept on telling him that I wanted to go home. He just kept on ignoring it. He kept on saying, no, we're gonna go to the park, we're gonna go here, we're gonna have a fun time, don't worry. His doors were locked and there was nobody walking around in the neighborhood that we were in. I'm sorry.
That's okay, take your time. There you go.
Thank you. I knew what was coming, and eventually, after he wouldn't listen for a few minutes, I just decided to, like, sit there, and my body shut down, and all I could do was, like, silently cry, and I tried to prepare myself for what was going to happen, but obviously that's not possible. You can't prepare yourself for a situation like that. When he reached over from his driver's seat, he grabbed my shoulder and like started turning me, but I wouldn't let him, and I guess that kind of like made him angry, and that was when he got more aggressive. After that ended, I was crying, and he told me, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that." And I said, "It's okay." And I was just sitting there still crying. And then he said, "Don't tell Jenny because we're gonna get married and we're going to have our daughter soon, and I don't want Jenny to know about this." And I said, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna tell anybody." I shouldn't have ignored the red flags. I should have told somebody that would do something about the situation. I should have confided in somebody and told him, "I'm speaking to this 33-year-old man and he's being inappropriate with me." I should have never gotten in that car in the first place, and even if I had gotten in there, I should have just gotten out with my sister. I should have stood up for myself. I should have known what I was worth.
You keep saying you should have. I want to make sure you know that at 14 years old, there's no expectation that you should have been able to learn this or learn that or know this or know that. But I think it's important for us to be able to talk about and for you to be able to share, so that way if another child experiences that they can say, this is not acceptable behavior. 14-year-olds shouldn't have to deal with that. How long did you wait till you finally told someone?
It was about to be a month before I told somebody. I didn't want to tell anybody. I was scared. I didn't want to defend myself.
Eventually, somebody noticed that you had some changes in your demeanor.
Yes. I became disassociated with my friends and family. I was rude to people. I was crying almost every single day at school. I was ditching school. I didn't want to go. And my English teacher noticed, and I came to her classroom one day because I was tired. And I started crying, and when I was about to tell her, I backed out last minute, so I ran out of her classroom, and she was kind enough to follow me out of her classroom, and she got my social worker from school involved, and my social worker, my teacher, and the principal were all driving in a golf cart trying to follow me to my house to speak to me, to ask me what was wrong. And I finally told them what had happened, and the rest is history.
I just was in a state of shock. I didn't know what to do. I was just thinking why, how is this happening? Why is this happening? I'm like, am I dreaming? I'm like, no, I'm not dreaming, I'm awake. So I just pretended to to wake up, and I immediately told him, can we go home? And he's like, no, it's 12 in the morning. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. So that's when I got my phone and I called my mom, and I said, Mom, please come get me. She came right away, and when she arrived to my dad's house, I told her he touched me, and that was it. She started yelling at him and saying, how could you ever do that? They're your daughters. He told me that it was a dream at first. He's like, no, Angie, we were dreaming. are you okay? You had a nightmare. And then I said, no, you touched me. I told him, you did things to me that you're not supposed to do, and just stay away from me, please. Don't talk to me, just stay away.
I was at work that day. I got home, and my husband was acting really weird. I have something I have to talk to you about. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you divorcing me? What's going on? You jump automatically to worst case scenario, just tone of voice, look on his face, just, oh, good golly, this is not gonna be a good conversation. And he's like, I have something I want to show you. And he handed me a piece of paper. And I picked up the paper and I read it, and you just burst into tears. And he's like, I said, who does this refer to? And he said, my brother. And I was your world just stops in that moment. He said, she came to me this morning. She said, Daddy, I can't take it anymore.
Do you remember what you first said to her when you had a chance to talk with her about what she wrote down?
She walks in the door and she just looks at me and these giant eyes and tears start rolling down her face. Hasn't said a word, and I just said, "I believe you, baby." And she just ran into my arms and I just wrapped her up and I just held her. I think at that point about a year had elapsed since the last incident. And coming from a little kid's perspective, her version of time is a little strange too, but she was so afraid. She was so afraid that I was going to hate her, that I was going to blame her, that I wasn't going to love her anymore. And she's like, because what was going on was wrong, and he kept telling me that it was my fault, that it was we would get in trouble if anyone found out. And I think just her overwhelming guilt about what had gone on pushed her to just keep silent, because she didn't want to be in trouble. She didn't want us to be mad.
I was 12 years old, and so it had happened for approximately 6 years.
What prevented you from telling somebody when you discovered that what was taking place was wrong?
He'd abuse me, he'd beat me with the PlayStation wire, and he would pull my hair or anything like that, and he would tell my mom, like, I'm grounding her, like, she's punished or something, like, oh, she's not listening to me. I'm being a tween, like, I'm testing my limit. So he kind of manipulated that into that. They felt that he was amazing. He was the most amazing person. And it wasn't that. He was hiding a true dark side of him.
You eventually did finally tell someone.
I ran away and I went to my friend's house. My friend Marco, he had texted me through Messenger on Facebook, and he was like, hey, like, where are you? Like, your mom's freaking out, trying to figure out where you are. And he was just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, I'm not gonna go back home. I'm done with the abuse, and I wrote that throughout the text. I'm done with the sexual abuse. I'm done with him touching me. I'm just done with it. And my mom at that time was at his house, and she was reading those messages. And so she had texted me through that messenger and was like, baby, it's me. I got you now, and we're gonna get this over with.
Since he met me, like, we've been 5+ years together. Like, so since he met me, he's been, doing this, and I didn't know, and you didn't, one thing I did tell him, like, why wouldn't you say something? Well, he threatened me, the social worker that talked to me, she's like, you'd be surprised how many parents don't believe their kids. I'm like, it ran through my mind. I'm like, I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, I sat there and I'm like, is this just being a teenager? But the one thing I told myself was, you gotta remember that if I don't believe her, and I don't at least go to this next step, which is go to the police and have somebody else investigate it, what if I make a huge mistake and say it's not true? And it was.
So the first thing I would love for you just to talk about, like, what you do as a forensic interviewer.
Okay. Well, I am a licensed clinical social worker and a forensic interviewer at a child advocacy center. And what my job is to interview a child or developmentally delayed adult at the request of law enforcement to conduct these, what are legally defensible, developmentally appropriate, culturally sensitive interviews. We want to reduce the number of times that a child is interviewed, especially if they're questioned about issues with trauma. And so my goal is to try to have a supportive environment for the child. It is a neutral. I remain neutral. It is a fact-finding interview. And the hope is to try to collect as much information as I can, from the child about an event that may have happened.
And in doing that, you follow a protocol. Can you talk about, like, what that protocol is, so people, if they have to go to a forensic interview, they know what to expect?
Sure. It's called the 10-step investigative protocol. It is a protocol that's research-based, and there's different stages of the interview. When we bring the child into the interview room, we introduce ourselves. We let them know. Usually there is a team observing the interview, which includes a child abuse detective. Sometimes child welfare services will be involved at that point if there's a protective issue with the child. And sometimes we do have a deputy district attorney present to observe the interview. So we notify the child of the observers. We also let them know that it is a recorded interview because their statement is going to be preserved for potential evidence, or it can be used as evidence in court. With the child, I discuss with them a set of instructions. These instructions are important because we want to reduce communication errors that often happens when a child and adult are talking. And so we are going to start at that point using what are called narrative invitational questions, or open-ended question versus those closed-ended questions. And that's going to be really important throughout the interview to try to get as much information and as much accurate information about the event. I do not know all the information. I don't know the answers to the questions that they're going to ask me. So it's going to be important for them to be able to tell me with their words of their experience. And if a child makes a statement about sexual abuse, or if it happened multiple times, then it's going to be really important for me to go and ask about specific events, such as a first event, first time, last time, or other significant event. Some of the cases that come in are potential life sentences, so we really want to make sure that we're getting as much accurate information and for the child to provide that, and not me as the interviewer.
Yeah. I know that when a child discloses it for the very first time, it's such a significant event for them. Can you talk about your understanding about how children disclose, whether it's what prompts them to disclose the first time or how they disclose over time?
Sometimes it's an accidental disclosure. Maybe they were not ready at that time, but maybe somebody interrupted an act that was happening, or somehow they found out without the child actually disclosing that. The majority of cases, a child makes a delayed disclosure. That's actually one of the myths in child sexual abuse, is that kids will tell right away. Actually, kids do not tell right away. They can wait many months or years to tell. There's a lot of consideration that victims will go through. There's a lot of thinking involved about who they're going to disclose to and how that person will respond. There's consideration about what the consequences are going to be with the family or, their home situation. So there's a lot of contemplation that happens with disclosure.
What are some of the reasons why kids will wait to disclose?
Well, as we know, the majority of sexual abuse occurs when the abuser is somebody that the child knows and trusts and has a relationship with, a trusted relationship with. And there's this whole process of grooming that comes with that. And so kids, they have this, what becomes a very secretive relationship with the perpetrator. The abuser manipulates the situation, and they want to make sure the child does not speak and the child remains silent so they can continue the abuse. So when a victim is in that situation, there's a lot of confusion that happens. There's a lot of fear. They want to tell, but they don't know how to tell. They worry about what, again, the consequences can be. They maybe don't want to get the abuser in trouble. They don't want to be in trouble. And it's interesting how many kids that I speak to say, I thought I would be in trouble, or I didn't think people would believe me. There are cases that I've been involved in where the abuser made threats to kill the child or kill the parent, and that's enough to keep a child silent.
How many years have you been working as a forensic interviewer in social work?
I have been a forensic interviewer for almost 14 years.
What would be the best guess of a percentage that you can make of the children that you have seen who have been offended by somebody they know or they trust, or even a parental or loving relationship?
Well, in the almost 2,000 interviews that I've done at the center, it's probably about 90%.
What advice would you offer to a parent whose child discloses to them and it's the first time that something like this has come to light? How would you give guidance to a parent?
Well, as one can imagine, it can be very shocking. A parent may experience disbelief, but what's critical for long-term well-being of the child is for the parent to believe the child and to let them know that you are proud of them and that you will make every effort to help them. Don't overreact as a parent. Allow the child to say, you could just say, tell me what happened, and don't ask leading questions. Avoid those leading questions, and assure them that or thank them for telling you and for trusting you, and that you're very smart and very brave to tell me, and that we're going to get help for you. And then that person is to make a report, so file a report to law enforcement or child welfare services.
I want you to talk about, if you can, some of your experience with how children cope with working through the fact that they've been a victim, they've disclosed, and they're kind of working through that process. What are some ways that kids may cope that are somewhat self-destructive?
Okay. Well, I will say that there are some children that present normal, okay, that go through every day, and they does not appear to be any type of problem. There are some kids that can do what we call compartmentalize the abuse, and even though it was very traumatic, but they somehow are able to store it away and do well in, say, school and academics, and maybe even excel and become performers. But there are many children who don't cope well, and we see things like depression, anxiety, withdrawal, sometimes engaging in aggressive behaviors or rebellion. And as they get older, we see, and into adulthood, coping in ways like substance abuse and alcohol, promiscuity. It's to numb themselves from the pain of the trauma of the abuse.
So for those kids that are out there that they've just never told a person, but they want to, what guidance would you offer?
Don't be afraid that there's help, and that it's not your fault, that there is help.
I think it's also important not just to educate kids who are victims, but to educate everyone. That if you hear about this, tell. Right? We hear if you see something, say something about the terrorism and stuff like that. If you hear something, say something, because that's what's going to stop it.
Talk about your experience in having gone through an investigation resulting from the assault that happened against you.
I was afraid at first. I was hesitant because I didn't know what the outcome would be, because in the beginning I didn't have evidence. I was pessimistic that nothing would get solved and everything would turn out bad for me. So I didn't want to at first, but then I met this really nice detective and we got the information that we needed.
And kind of just, I got everybody's support, and I had your support as well. And so knowing that I was safe, and we got the restraining order, and just knowing that we're gonna be done with this soon, it kind of felt good. It felt like I was finally secure, and I was taking my life back, and I was turning it around.
After you learned about it from your husband, after you talked to your daughter, did you have an idea as to what to do next? Like, did you have the what now moment?
So I didn't know initially what to do, but with the help of some background information and just the resources being available right there, it made it easier for me to know what to do next. After you took over, I mean, within 12 hours, I had already showed up at the police station. You said, just come on down. You didn't make me feel like I was being investigated, even though I'm sure that was part of it.
I would hope that that's every detective's goal, is you don't want to go in there and feel like you've got the lights down on you and that you're experiencing like some kind of, interrogation of any kind. And so I'm glad to hear you say that. And so when you mentioned the forensic interview, had you had any idea what a forensic interview was?
Nope. I just trusted in what you said that it needed to happen. My reference to a forensic interview, I'm thinking, okay, so forensics is something that happened in the past.
Yeah.
You think of CSI, things like that. You don't think of somebody that's able to talk to your kid and get information from them. So I had no idea what a forensic interview is, but I trusted you.
What did you come away with after she participated in that forensic interview?
Relief. It's scary. It's absolutely, because like you said, you're trusting your child with more strangers. You are sat in a room, they take your kid, and you wait, and then at the end of it, you're brought in again, and you're talked to about what was found. And that's hard, because a lot of times you hear things you don't necessarily want to hear, or you do hear what you want to hear, and like, okay, now we have enough, we can move forward from here.
So now you're here, you're in the midst of this investigation. What concerns did you have about your family at that point? Because now you have a family member that has offended against your daughter. So talk about like your concerns and that dynamic, having to go through that with family.
Part of the problem with this is, especially with family members, if they're not willing to step up to the responsibility of what they did, it can very quickly become a he said, she said. So again, having a great detective there, I was very worried that there would be doubt cast on her by other people. I was obviously very concerned with my daughter's mental state. I needed to, immediately after we started this whole process, I got her into counseling. I literally just got on the internet and started Googling. There's a lot of waiting because, you know, you're putting together your case for us. We're waiting on the DA to come through and say, yes, we're going to press charges. No, we're not going to press charges. You're wondering what's going on with the other family members. And you hope that, like in our case, that it's smooth and easy and they admit to what happened and you're able to move forward like you did. Well, I feel like a lot of hurry up and wait and then take care of your kid in the meantime. Yeah, that's a great way to say it, because that's just the reality of it. How did you feel after you learned that your family member was interviewed and he confessed? Beyond compare. When you came to tell me that you had done the interview, you had questioned him about what had happened, he had admitted, written that statement that he had written. It's just, I think I started crying at that point, because it's just like, I don't have to fight this other fight now. Yeah. Because you've got the first fight of, okay, this happened to my kid, and then so many people, I'm sure, have to go with, now we have to prove that this happened. Whereas in our incidents, he made it easy on us by saying, yeah, I did this. And I wouldn't say it's easy necessarily, but it made that part of it easier. So it was just overwhelming relief. And so again, if you were to reflect back, if you were to kind of look all the way back at the investigative process, what was the most important aspect of it to you? How you handled everything. How easy you made it on us. I advocated for my daughter at first, you advocated for us after. As far as the investigative process goes, just moving quickly, getting things done as quickly as you can, and making sure that all the pieces were in line correctly, so that if there were any questions called into it, you're like, no, ironclad, we're done. I want to ask you, because you had the opportunity to confront him. Yes. And you did that by talking to him on the phone. Talk about what that was like for you, and how you felt about being able to confront him in a safe place.
It was somewhat nerve-wracking. I know it was over the phone, but I was somewhat scared of him, and I still had that factor that I didn't want to hurt him, and I knew that that phone call would eventually grant me the evidence I needed to get consequences for him. It was a mixture of hesitation, and there was also sorrow involved for me, because I don't know why, but I felt like I cared about him. I know I cared about him, and I didn't want to hurt him.
I felt bad at the same time. I do admit that, because he's my dad, you know. Yep. I don't wish the worst for him. I didn't, and I still don't to this day. And it was also a relief, because I knew that what was happening was inappropriate and that something needed to change. So I knew that I had to get out of my naive comfort zone and to do something about it. And it was over after that phone call, so it was like, goodbye, Alan, and I'm sorry, but I have to do what's right for myself, and I have to take care of myself, because I'm not in a good place right now, and this is because of you. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And I kept on blaming myself, but it wasn't my fault. It was his fault for doing that to me. I couldn't blame myself anymore for his actions. You know, you have to pay for what you did. And that's what you have to learn. Yeah. You know? We dialed him, and you were listening on the other line, and we were just taking down notes. And so at that time, you were slipping me like, hey, like, bring this up type of thing. Like, we need to catch him. Like, we want him to confess to it. Because at first he was like, what are you talking about? And type of thing. But then I was just like, hey, I'm pregnant. And he was like, huh? Like, what do you mean? Like,
what do you mean you're pregnant? Like, no, I haven't touched you in this long. So that's like, boom, we got him right then and there. It's going to be over with. That's his confession right there.
And you were not pregnant at the time.
No.
That was the cool.
Yeah.
You were like, we can say that?
Yeah.
Like, yes, we're going to say that.
Yeah. And so then you guys were like, we're going to go arrest him now.
Seeing Alan get arrested was probably the best thing I've seen in my life. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, if you could talk about what your role is as a prosecutor, specifically with child sexual abuse.
Okay. Well, I've been a district attorney in San Diego County for 10 years now. I came from Riverside County where I did similar type cases, and I had a background in civil law before that. So my role as a prosecutor, first off, I work in the Family Protection Division. So we specifically are trained and we handle any crimes that deal with crimes against children, whether it be physical abuse or sexual abuse on kids under 14, as well as domestic violence and elder abuse. So our role, first off, is to get justice for our victims. We want to hold the perpetrator accountable for what they've done and basically give victims a voice back and empower them.
And you really kind of touched on it. I was going to ask you, for anyone who might be who may be unfamiliar with the judicial process, what they can expect when they find that they're going to be working with you because their child has been the victim of a sexual assault.
So I guess I'll start at the beginning. First off, law enforcement conducts their investigation. Typically in a case that involves an unthinkable crime against a kid, we'll be contacted early on so we can work together with them. Typically, kids will be interviewed by a specialist, a social worker, that'll conduct a forensic interview. That's so that the interview and the information obtained during that interview isn't tainted. Because the last thing we want to do is mess up a case when we know something bad has happened to a kid. We don't want to, it's a delicate thing. We don't want that to be ruined in any way. And before that even begins, first you want to find out what happened, right? So how do you do that? Well, who knows what happened? First off, you got to talk to the person it happened to, right? So you bring the kids in. It's a controlled environment. It's videotaped. The reason it's videotaped is so that it can't be picked apart later. The defense attorney can't come in and say, well, they must have told them X, Y, and Z. No, this is what happened. Here it is. Take a look at it.
I want to ask you about that. So let me ask you this. If a parent were to interview their child and try and extract all this information, is that something that could be used in court?
It could be. There's an idea of suggestibility. Defense attorneys, and they'll hire experts to talk about, kids. And anyone who has kids knows it. You can say, what happened at school today? Did anything bad happen at school today? Or did someone push you today at school? Because you'll get a different answer. The way the questions are asked are very important. So we tell parents all the time, don't talk to your kids about this stuff. Don't ask them about it because it will come out in court, whether we know it or not. That something may have been said that could be misconstrued. It doesn't change what happened to the child, but it might change the way a jury sees it. And that could potentially hamstring our ability to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is important. And again, we tell parents you could talk about the court process, you can explain what's going to happen, what's going on, but once you find out something bad has happened, just sort of stop. Don't ask any more questions, as hard as it might be, because as parents, we want to know, and just contact the authorities and let the pros do what they do. We typically meet with the parents early on to try to explain to them the process about once the investigation is happening, sort of our role in that investigation, what we're looking for. So law enforcement will package it up. They get the investigation to us, the reports, the forensic interview, which typically we'll try to watch ourselves and be there present while it's happening. We'll review all of that. And when we review that, we're asking ourselves two questions. Ethically, as prosecutors, we can only issue cases where we can answer two questions in the affirmative. First, do we think this person committed a crime? That's number one. That's usually a pretty easy answer. The second answer can sometimes be a bit more frustrating. And the second question is, do we think we could prove it to 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt? Fortunately, law enforcement typically does such a good job that we can issue cases more often than not. So when we first meet with the family, we'll provide our information, we'll introduce ourselves, try to start building rapport at that time. We're not going to be talking to kids about what happened to them. That's not something that we are going to do early on until we really have to.
And when would that point be? When would you find that you're now having to make sure you can talk to the child about what they've disclosed?
If in fact it's ever necessary to go into a courtroom and put on evidence. So fortunately, most of the cases that we issue, we typically don't have to go to court. Luckily, the legislature has realized how awful and heinous these crimes are and have appropriate punishments. So a lot of times it's in the perpetrator's best interest not to drag these victims through something that's just re-victimizing them. It's bad enough they had to go through this the first time. It's a whole other thing to have to come in and talk about it. We had a renowned forensic interviewer in our county who used to explain in trainings, you can take adults, and if I asked you right now, tell us all in detail, every single detail, step by step, your last intimate experience with your wife. How uncomfortable is that, right? Think about having some 6-year-old kid come in and tell 15 strangers, whoever else is in the courtroom, and maybe some news cameras to explain that. So it's not something we want to do if we could avoid it. Being a prosecutor in this unit is we try to find that balance between getting the just result and getting the punishment that fits the crime versus having to force a child to go through something that they perhaps don't want to go through. So we try to find that balance in there. And in doing so, it's not a decision we make on our own. We're constantly contacting the victim's family. There's never going to be a situation where a victim's family is going to turn on the news and see that someone pled guilty and, and that's not how things are done or not how they're supposed to be done.
Talk about when it would be beneficial to provide a plea or to issue an option for them to take a plea versus when it would maybe be beneficial or necessary to go to trial.
That's a decision we're not going to make on our own. It's something we're going to talk to the family about. We try to incentivize defendants and perpetrators to take responsibility early on. Now, you can't punish someone for exercising their right to a trial. But what we can do is, let's say we think a case is worth 40 years. If we think a case is worth 40 years, but there might be a benefit to not having a kid go through it. If we've got a family who doesn't want to go through it, or God forbid, we've all had cases where kids have attempted to harm themselves. We don't want that to happen. We'll talk to the family and say, okay, well, we think it's worth 40 years, but to avoid further damage to this child, maybe we offer 32. And in the process, I talk about we're not just going to jump into trial without the evidence we need. We're also not going to just jump into trial and throw a child into a courtroom without making sure they're properly prepared. So some of the things we do in our office, after having initial meetings, we'll talk with families. We'll meet with the kids just so they get comfortable with us. We have a program called Kids in Court where we bring kids and their families to court to sort of get them comfortable in a courtroom. When the show was on and popular, I'd oftentimes ask them if they've ever watched American Idol, and now's their chance to sing into the microphone. You just want to make kids comfortable so that when they do have to walk into a courtroom, it's one less thing for them to worry about. We also have victim advocates in our office. Now, our office is larger than most in the country, but I think most offices in the country have sort of a multidisciplinary approach in their office now, meaning they've got their own investigators to do some follow-up things if need be. We've got prosecutors, we've got victim advocates. The reason we have victim advocates is because we want to make sure that these victims and their families, because the child isn't the only victim in the family. Everyone's got to deal with this. We want to make sure they're getting the help they need in terms of therapy. Sometimes they need to be relocated. Sometimes there's expenses that need to be covered that they can't pay for. Moving, security, things of that nature. So there's programs that are in place. In California, there's a victim compensation fund, which essentially is when defendants get convicted of crimes, they have to pay money into a fund. Now that money is later used to make victims and their families whole or cover expenses that need to be covered immediately that they don't have the money for. So our victims will fill out those forms and make sure that the victims can get the services that are available to them. Another thing we do is we've got a support dog program. Lots of kids, mine included, just love dogs. They just feel more comfortable when dogs are around. So we found over the years, in addition to a victim's right to have a support person in a courtroom, meaning they can have someone sitting right beside them, just for, moral support. They can bring dogs into the courtroom with them now. They can't bring their own dog because, their own dog might be running around going nuts or going to the bathroom in the courtroom, but we've got a lineup of support dogs. We've got like a list with photos, and sometimes we'll bring the kids in and say, hey, you can have a dog, pick one, right? So, you notice kids walking in a little bit with their chest puffed out when they got a dog with them. They can get little dogs sitting on their lap, big dogs at their legs, so it helps. The majority of the time, like I said, our cases don't go to court. Yeah. And if they do, a lot of times it ends up being a lot worse for the defendants because, as we all know from doing this long enough, kids don't just come out the gate and say, this is all the horrible stuff that happened to me. As they get more comfortable, they start telling us more and more. And experienced defense attorneys will try to get a plea early on because I think there's that awareness that if we get this kid in court, we might find out something a lot worse. The way it's been explained to me over the years is, think about getting into a pool. When a kid gets into a pool or when a kid's making a disclosure, they sort of stick their toe in the pool, see how it feels. Nothing bad happens, it's not too cold. So then they step in one more step. Okay, it's still okay. And then they keep gradually, slowly but surely getting further and further into the pool. And I think it's the same thing, especially a lot of times what these victims have gone through. It's not just a physical aspect alone. There's some sort of duress or pressure being put on them by these people that they know, who they think love them. And they're oftentimes maybe not expressly threatened, but there's an implication made that, you know how much I love you, and if you tell anyone, I could get in trouble, or you could get in trouble, or this could break up the family. And that's a lot of weight to put on a kid. And when we see it all the time, when kids start coming to court and saying things, there's that fear there that they're going to be responsible, and it's on them because that's what's been put in their head.
Can you speak about some of the most common characteristics that you've seen between the offender and victim relationship?
It is extremely rare that these crimes occur by strangers. Unfortunately, when it does happen by strangers, that's what the community hears about because it's so scary and it's so unexpected, and it's what we say, it's every parent's worst nightmare, right? So every parent's worst nightmare makes good TV. So that's what we hear about. That's what parents are looking out for. In reality, it's mom's new boyfriend, or it's uncle that everyone loves, or it's grandpa who's been great over the years. It's primarily males. There's no ethnic, racial, socioeconomic boundaries. It happens all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason for it. And I think the most important thing is just to be vigilant and educate your kids.
I remember your mom was a bit reluctant initially to go and to meet with the district attorney. Do you remember why that was?
Because we didn't have the financial resources to get an attorney or a lawyer. We just didn't have any money for it.
And so was it your thought and your mom's thought that if you go to a district attorney that you guys would have to pay for those costs?
Yes, and we couldn't afford it.
Okay. So eventually I think you and I had a conversation about the fact that there's no costs whatsoever, right? Mm-hmm. And that they're an advocate for you.
Yes.
And then eventually did you have the opportunity to meet with the district attorney?
Yes, I did.
Talk about that experience.
They reassured me that everything would be fine, that they would do their best to do whatever it was in my best interest, and that my mother and I wouldn't have to pay anything, which was relieving because my mother was panicking, seeing how she would afford an attorney and try to make ends meet. Yeah. And just to hear somebody say, we're not going to charge you for anything, like, it was basically they were offering me their help and with no charge, and it was relieving because I don't know what would have happened if I had to pay for one. She asked me if when his sentencing came, if I would be happy with it or not, and if I wasn't, to express my discomfort. No.
So how did it make you feel to be given the opportunity to kind of share your thoughts about what you think should happen?
I felt like I was listened to, like I finally had a voice and I was using it and people were actually listening to me.
Do you remember having having the opportunity to learn about a program called Kids in Court.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about your experience with Kids in Court.
That was cool, because then you just went in and it was like all empty and nobody was in there, and you're like, oh dang, this is what a courtroom looks like, you know. It kind of looks like what it seems on TV, you know. It's kind of cool. Like, I was obsessed with Law and Order and all that, so I was just like, dang, I'm in a real one. And so that was interesting. We were able to sit down in the chair and sit up at where we were gonna sit to speak in the little podium, and kind of just like, hey, this is where you're gonna be, but you know, there's gonna be water right here, there's gonna be tissues right here, we're gonna be giving you stress balls, and you're gonna have the dog, and so he's gonna be right there, like right underneath you, and you know, you can have your shoe off and you can pet him with your foot. And so I'm like, okay, you know, getting like a feel for it, and kind of like, all right, it's not that big, but it's also not that small. So kind of like, all right, you need to get used to this. So it was cool. So
you went through a preliminary hearing, and then George made the decision he wanted to go to trial. So talk about your experience in going to trial.
That kind of like ticked me off. Like, okay, I'm gonna have to continue seeing his face in face like over and over again. But I knew, all right, you want to go to trial? No worries. Like, we already have you. And so during that time, it was hard, and I remember like picking at the stress ball and like just tearing that up and even like squeeze it. I was just ripping it because I was so like agitated. Like, why didn't you just like say no? Like, I am guilty. Like, you're trying to say you're not guilty. So that was kind of hard, and just missing school and being out of school a lot was like nerve-wracking, and I was like, I have to get my studies up, so I was like behind on that. But in the end, it all worked out.
And what did the jury decide?
That he was guilty, and so he was charged on all counts, and he got 300 years plus to life. And
372?
So, yeah, 372.
How did it make you feel when you learned that the jury said guilty and he was going to go away for that amount of time?
That made me happy. He's going to get the karma that he deserves, and he did. He's not going to hurt me, and he's not going to be able to hurt anybody else. It's finally over, and I'm able to move on with my life. He's going to die in there.
Talk about some of the things that you have had to battle through in this process of restoration for you.
My biggest challenge was self-blame. I blamed myself for what happened. I thought everything was my fault, that I brought it upon myself, that he didn't deserve that I ruined his life. And I went through a lot of therapy. I'm finally happy. You know, I met a lot of people who cared about me. They helped me get through it. They helped me see that it wasn't my fault. I'm actually someone, and I do matter now. I finally realized that. I mean, it's a battle every day, but I'm looking forward to what's to come next in my life for the first time in my life.
I play softball. That kind of gets my anger out. My academics, they're really amazing. Like, not to brag, but I'm a straight A student, and I've kept it that way. Even going through with the whole trial, I never let my grades fail me. I have my life to continue. I can't mess up now. I want to do political science, and after I major in political science, I'll be heading off to law school to become an attorney.
That is so great.
Yeah.
A prosecutor?
Yes. And I want to be able to let like other people know who are in the same position, like it's okay, and kind of like, you know, I went through something like that, and look where I'm at now.
Right away, I got therapy. I was like, I don't need it. I was like, I'm good. I'm strong enough to. I don't need to go to therapy. You know, I put that in my head. I was like denying how much help I needed because I wanted to seem like a strong person, I guess. At the time, I wasn't being smart about it. Like, being strong is just improving yourself, and like by improving myself, I had to be going to therapy, getting out what I felt, you know. And I was just being stupid and saying that I didn't need it when I really did. So now I'm going to community college. So
good for you.
My dream is to be like something police related, you know, like a cop or, you know, something in that field, like crime investigating, all that stuff.
you would be awesome.
Yeah. I think what happened to me, like, impacted me a lot. I want to help everybody else out there, too.
So she's a 4.1 student. Awesome. She's very determined to get into Yale. She has already been awarded a $20,000 scholarship, and she's a junior. She's just pushing herself. She wants to be a lawyer. She wants to go into criminal justice. She wants to, give back, because she realized that what she went through and all the support that she's gotten in life, the least that she could, in her way of giving back, is fighting for those that can't. Fighting for those that can't have a voice. And she's very determined to do it. I remember one day I looked at her mom. She was down, she was beating herself up, and I looked at her, I'm like, this doesn't define you. It can't define you. And it shouldn't define you. I'm like, this doesn't define you. It's a bump in the road.
What would you say to a child who has been sexually abused but they've never told anyone?
I would say to speak up for yourself, confide in somebody that you trust. If you don't speak up for yourself, then the situation will only escalate, and it's better to tell somebody than to stay quiet. I speak from experience. If you can't do it for yourself, at least do it for the people you love, because try reversing the situation, and if you had somebody that you love and somebody was sexually abusing them, you'd want them to stand up for themselves and say something. So if something makes you uncomfortable, express your discomfort with that person, or if not, with somebody that you trust.
I would encourage them to say something, like speak out, like your voice isn't taken from you. They're not taking your voice. You still have that at that moment.
I would just tell them, like, it seems like the best thing to do, like, is not say anything, but really you're just keep hurting yourself, and it's not healthy to keep it. You need to get justice. Yeah.
Don't be afraid. And speak up. Say it. Scream it. At the top of your lungs to anybody that will listen.
Any inappropriate touching that's occurred to you is not your fault. And when you're ready, you should tell someone, because it's important that that person never does it to anyone else again. And no matter what that person told you, they didn't love you. They weren't your friend. They weren't, your loving caretaker. They weren't your teacher, your grandpa. That's not what they were. Nothing you say is going to get you in trouble. Nothing you say is going to get them in trouble. You telling what happened isn't going to get them in trouble. That's not on you. That's on them. They did it. You didn't do anything.
It's gonna hurt, but it's gonna get better. It's gonna be scary, but you can do it. Know that there are people out there that will help you. Even if it's not necessarily the first person you talk to, tell somebody else, because somebody eventually is going to be there for you, and they're gonna take care of you.
I think it's critical to know that a predator isn't necessarily always a stranger, that it can also be somebody really close to you, and somebody like a family member or friend is just as dangerous as a stranger. So don't make assumptions based on appearances. The real monster can be somebody in your close circle, so you always have to be cautious.
Stranger danger doesn't only apply to everybody around you. It can also happen in your home.
What advice would you give to parents who are in the midst of walking through this right now, and they feel like they're lost, they feel like they just don't know where to go and where to turn because their child just told them for the first time what happened?
Cry. Start with that. Have yourself a good cathartic cry. Do it maybe where your kid can't see you in that moment. Help them, hold them, love them. Give yourself a second and walk away and just break down as hard as you need to. If you just found out and this is your one moment to either make or break your kid, give it to them. Give them that moment. Hold them. Love them and just say, we got you. We're gonna hold you. We're gonna hold each other until we get through this. That's what I would say.
You can't be around Karina and not recognize that she embodies joy. Karina is never without a smile, and her daughter is who she is and all that she will become because of Karina's heart and goodness. Rosabelle has a resilient spirit. She has endured trial after trial and never loses her fighting spirit. She is all in for her family, and she will stop at nothing to give them a solid future. Rosie is a force to be reckoned with. She is totally tenacious, driven, and absolutely in pursuit of her destiny. She's unstoppable. What I love about Madison is that she's a quiet fighter. She is thoughtful, graceful, and brave, and has total belief in her future. Angie, to me, is a determined visionary. What I love about her is that she sees herself for who she is, not what she's experienced. She is completely determined, courageous, and she has the gift of being compassionate. There is a consistent virtue possessed by every child who comes forward to disclose they've been the victim of sexual abuse, and that's courage. They enter the unknown after experiencing the unimaginable to confront and call out evil and the one who perpetrated it. Let their stories embolden you to pursue justice, cling to hope, and find courage in the midst of darkness.